This is a game between two top players, Vassily Ivanchuk and Vassily Topalov. It was played about 14 years ago, but it still shows a great way of handling the initiative on the white side of the Sicilian defense. The opening was the Scheveningen variation of the Sicilian defense, and both sides developed their pieces. Black has conceded a bit of space, but he has control over the central squares with the pawns. These are all standard moves. Black plays queen c7 to prevent e5. White prevents the b5 advance. So black can't do this yet. Knight c6, bishop e3. So that if black takes, then white will be able to capture back with the bishop, or maybe even with the queen. Rook e8. This is a standard move. The idea of rook e8 is maybe to prepare the e5 advance and also to free up the square for the bishop, so the bishop may later go back to f8. Bishop to f3. This is standard. Would be 8. g4. So white wants to advance g5 and basically force this knight to retreat. And then he may continue with f5 or something else. The main line here is to play something like knight to d4, bishop d4, and then e5, freeing up this bishop. Takes. And here the key issue is the control over the d5 square. So white wants to play g5 and then play knight d5, but for the time being the bishop is attacked, so normally he plays something like bishop to e7, the rook retreats, and then after g5 white sort of gained the tempo to play knight d5. So, and then there's more theory in this line. But the move which was played by Topalov in this game, bishop f8, is also a theoretical line. Now white continues with g5 immediately. The knight has to retreat. Now bishop g2, the idea is to maybe free up the diagonal for the queen, and maybe also to open up the file for the rook. So it's a good and useful move. Now black has to decide how to develop his queenside. Basically, he cannot play b5 yet because it's under control. He cannot play b6 all that easily either, because if he goes b6, then he has to worry about, oh well, what happens then if white takes and then goes with e5, opening up this dangerous bishop. Maybe not exactly this way, but some similar ideas are at stake. So usually black first takes on d4, and after that he can also play b5. It would be a bit more careful probably to play something like b6 and then still get the bishop out to this diagonal. But Topalov tried to play a bit more aggressively, so he went b5. The idea is that from b5 the pawn can also advance to b4 and harass this knight. One downside of playing b5 is that now the a file opens up, and this bishop now has a bit more scope, and maybe even the pawn on b5 is going to be a weakness. So white captured, and now rook a7. So this harasses the queen, and if say black tries to block with rook b7, then because of the pin, white can win the pawn for the time being. So black has to retreat with queen d8, and now b4 is a very useful move, because now this knight cannot come to c5. Black also cannot advance the pawn to b4, that's prevented. Now this pawn is possibly a target as well. So a very useful move. It's not often played in the Sicilian because there's usually pressure on the c file. Here there isn't any, so b4 is a good idea to play. Black still has to solve the problem of this bishop, how to get him out. He still cannot go to b7 because b5 is hanging. So Black tries to open up this diagonal for the bishop, and he goes e5. The move seems natural, but it has a couple of downsides. One downside is that now the d5 square is weakened, and also after the f file opens up, this rook will start to put pressure on f7, and we'll see how that's particularly important here, because there's more pressure on f7 because the rook is also still on the 7th rank. So for the time being, white retreated, and again Black has to do something so that he would open up the diagonal for the bishop. So he traded on f4 and played knight to e5, and now at least the bishop can jump out to g4. Of course, white occupies a good square with the knight d5. The bishop comes out. This, I think, is a bit underestimating the danger of pressure on f7. So, let's say in the case of bishop e6, he has to worry about maybe knight to c7, or maybe more pressure on f7 being built up. So, it wouldn't have solved all the problems. Play bishop g4, white just retreated, queen d2, and here Black had to sense the danger of the position and realize how tricky is defending the f7 square. Already white's threatening to just capture here and then just take on f7 with one of the rooks. So he retreated with the knight, attacking the rook at the same time, but maybe it was safer to play knight to c4 and hit the queen. Then after queen f2, he could go bishop h5 and maybe guard f7, and maybe he could survive here for the time being. Instead, he played knight to c6, and this really allowed a beautiful combination from Ivanchuk. It seems like the rook has to go because while it's attacked, there's not many squares he can go to on the 7th rank. Maybe he has to go rook a6, but something unexpected was played instead. White went g6. What is the idea of this move? Is that just giving up a pawn? Well, it turns out that this serves a very important purpose, opening up the diagonal for the bishop with tempo, because this is a threat. And when the bishop moves, then the rook comes into play and starts to hit against f7, and this really is pretty much deciding the game. So if he just takes, then bishop g5, queen has to move, or if he tries to block the attack, then white is just going to crush through and give checkmate. Check, check, checkmate. Very nice. So he has to kind of go with the flow, take the rook. White takes, so this is a fork, but unfortunately if he takes back, then again bishop g5 wins the queen with a discovered check. So he has to retreat, and now another intermediate move, bishop g5, very important to throw this in. The queen has to retreat. Now a little joke, he could have promoted to a queen, but it doesn't really matter because Black has to capture this piece anyway. So he captured, and now it seems like the material is even. White doesn't have immediate checkmate, but it turns out his pieces are so much more active than Black's. Black's has the knight on the edge of the board here. The bishop is kind of loose. Other pieces are on the back rank. The king is potentially weak. So white just starts to build up the pressure, and Black just cannot defend on time. Queen f2, hitting f8, has to be protected. And we saw how before white played g5 and g6, opening up diagonal for this bishop. Well, now he opens up the other bishop the same way. So he goes e5. The idea is to move the knight away and then come in with the bishop to d5. And this will bring in the last piece that was not doing much. And this basically decides the game. So Black tries to counterattack, but that just weakens the light squares. And after knight b6, freeing up the d5 square with tempo because now the queen is attacked. The queen has to go, the bishop comes into the game, check, another check. Now the pieces get regrouped, now the queen is attacked, and the bishop is already on e4. And after queen d7, white delivered the last blow, knight to e7, and black resigned because, say, if he takes, then check, and then queen here, checkmate is inevitable. So a very good game by Ivanchuk, and a couple of nice tricks which allowed him to open up the bishops that really decided the game. g6 and e5. Those are definitely points to remember.